Hey everyone, and welcome to Private Podcast, where we plug in and explore the intersection of privacy, human rights, technology, and democracy. I'm your host, Derek Silva. Today we're speaking with Gbenga Sesan. Gbenga is the executive director of Paradigm Initiative, a pan-African social enterprise working on digital inclusion and digital rights. Prior to starting Paradigm, he led the Lagos Digital Village, a joint project between Junior Achievement of Nigeria, Microsoft, and the government of Lagos, Nigeria. Sesan is a Schwab Foundation Social Entrepreneur of the Year, former member of the United Nations Committee of E-Leaders on Youth and ICT, that is a long title, Archbishop Desmond Tutu Leadership Fellow, and Ashoka Fellow. Gbenga was listed by CNN as one of the top 10 African tech voices on Twitter and by Ventures Africa as one of 40 African legends under 40. Gbenga, that is one heck of a resume. Thanks for taking the time to be here today.
Thank you for inviting me there.
Terrific. Let's get right into it. Paradigm Initiative. What is it? Tell us a little bit about it.
Thanks. So, like you said, Paradigm Initiative is a social enterprise, and I think that is something we say very quickly because we work as a non-profit, but we take advantage of the entrepreneurship model of making sure that we exchange our skills for resources that can help us do the work sustainably. Two areas of focus for us are training for underserved young people and digital policy. We started in 2007 as a Nigerian organization that was just busy training young people so they can improve their lives after getting digital skills. But then we extend into a Pan-African organization in 2017, 10 years later. And so
Nice.
now we work as a regional organization with offices in 6 countries across the continent. But everything that we do centers around youth, tech policy, and digital opportunities.
That's awesome. That's exactly the sort of organizations I love to see pop up and help people empower themselves, as opposed to waiting around for something to happen. There's nothing like taking the bull by the horns and trying to make some change one way or the other. So, what led you to found Paradigm Initiative?
Well, I always catch myself telling the story of my third year in high school when I'm asked this question. I was denied access to a computer lab. My school had received 2 computers. This was in 1991. So you can imagine there were not so many computers in all of Nigeria. There were a lot of computers,
Yeah.
but definitely not in schools. And so I saw the principal going to the gate and walking with this truck that was carrying something. I knew whatever it was important because he walked from the gate of the school about 150 meters to his office, and then they loaded those things. I found out later they were called computers because my friend, who was my classmate, would go there to play computer games. He called them, and then he would come back to class and. All the girls loved him. All the guys were jealous. And so I decided I was going to be a cool kid. So I also went to the lab. I went, it was in the second half of the principal's office, by the way. So getting into a principal's office in secondary school was impossible. I mean, it was either you were being suspended or you won a
Yeah.
national contest. But that day
Yeah.
I raised, the odds and I went there through the principal's office. Thankfully, he wasn't around. And then the second half where the computers were, I got to the door and the teacher literally looked down at me and said, "Oh, computers are not for people like you. You can't understand how to use them." And like every, opinionated young man at that age, I was 13 going on 14. I went back to class, made sure to clean my eyes so the girls won't see me crying. Now I know men cry. Then I didn't believe men should cry. And so I decided that I was going to learn whatever it was called, I was going to learn it. I was challenged. So when I learned, I decided I was going to learn it and also teach other young people. It wasn't until 10 years later that I became Nigeria's IT Youth Ambassador through a contest that I was involved with. And then I remembered my promise. So when I finished from the university, I went to work for a non-profit junior achievement for 1 year. That's what I plan to do, work for 1 year and then go to an oil servicing company to make money. But then 1 year turned into 6 years because I really fell in love with doing work in a non-profit space. I could see lives being changed. And so 6 years later, I had about, I think, $4,000 in savings, which I thought was a lot of money. So I thought, wait, let me just pursue my dream of training young people. I'd done it for Lagos State and Microsoft and Junior Achievement, but I wanted to do something at a higher level, focused 100% on ICT opportunities. So I left. Of course, I soon learned 4,000 wasn't a lot, and I had to look for a lot more. So that's how Paradigm Initiative started. I'd actually, I resigned and took a break. I went for a, fellowship program, the Archbishop Desmond Tutu Leadership Fellowship. It was on my way back. While we were there, it was a very deep program for me because we had to do a lot of, self-assessment, a lot of thinking about the future, a lot of, thinking about leadership on the continent. And so on the way back was when I scribbled an idea of what I would do as maybe just a hobby. But then when I landed and I started implementing that training program in a community called Ajegunle in Lagos, Nigeria, I knew it wasn't just going to be, it wasn't going to be anything like a hobby. It was going to be the work of my life. And that's what I've done since then.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Good for you. So where did your interest in digital rights and digital inclusion come from? Was it that initial
Mm.
experience of the teacher telling you that these computers are
No,
not
it
for
wasn't.
you, or did it come a little bit later?
It came a bit later. So in 2007, July to be precise, on my birthday, in 2007, I thought it was, I mean, it was, I celebrated so many birthday ceremonies, and so I wanted to give back to young people. So what I did was I had this training program for young people, and then we built on that to start training anyone who was interested in that community called Ajegunle, which is a popular, notorious slum in Lagos. I mean, it doesn't. It's definitely not a slum when you get there, but that's the perception that people have of it. And so when that training continued, I decided I was going to keep training. So at some point, I was invited to this national program in Abuja, in the capital city of Nigeria, to talk about what I was doing. And I did. Microsoft was hosting the program and they invited me as a partner who they were willing to support. And I spoke. And while speaking, I talked about the fact that, oh, by the way, some of my students used to be cyber criminals, but now they're no longer cyber criminals. And I thought that was a good thing to say, right? But when I was done, one of the officials from the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, the anti-corruption agency in Nigeria, walked up to me and said, "Oh, by the way, did you say that you train cyber criminals?" I said, "Yes. They're no longer cyber criminals, but I train them." He said, "Okay, where is your office?" And I described to him, and he said, "Expect us. We'll come and arrest them." And I was like, "Why are you going to arrest them?" He said, "Well, the law says if you commit a crime, we arrest you." I said, "But how about the fact that they no longer commit that crime?" He said, "Well, that's what the law says. If you don't like it, change it." Interesting enough, I think he was kidding, but what it did was it dug a big hole into me that said, if you don't like policy, fix it. So that's how I got involved with policy. The cybercrime law was my first take in 2008. Between then and 2013, I didn't realize that the cybercrime law was being used against journalists and citizens that were considered opposition or that were considered very loud against government voices. And so it was worrying for me that their human rights was being violated. And the fact that their human rights in an online environment, which is basically their digital rights, was being violated, got me very curious. And in about 2013, I got involved with a community of other activists who were interested in the same topic, and we started talking a lot about it. And then we built a program in 2013. We started hosting a forum called the Internet Freedom Forum, which is now called the Digital Rights and Inclusion Forum. We actually just finished hosting the 8th edition on April 30. And so that experience in 2008 was where my interest in digital policy started with cybercrime, and then the experience I had seeing many countries eventually shutting down the internet, disrespecting rights of citizens, sending some of them to jail for the things they said online, got me very, very interested in digital rights. And as my life is about challenges. When you challenge me that I can't do something, that's exactly what I'm going to do. A teacher said I can't use computers. I'm training folks now. And, when government says we're going to punish you for doing the wrong thing online, well, I'm making it the course of my life to make sure that you will have a tough time getting people's rights violated without answering questions.
Yeah, I can definitely see where you're coming from there in terms of almost like taking black hats and turning them into white hats. Like your skills are
Yes,
valuable. That's right. You don't
absolutely,
want to diminish that, but putting them to better use
absolutely.
is exactly
Hmm.
where how you help. Not necessarily, it's not a panacea, but it's how you
Hmm.
help eliminate additional crime or additional malicious
Absolutely.
attacking. And instead, we end
Absolutely.
up with some of the best security researchers ever. So
Exactly.
that's
Exactly.
great.
If you can
Good for
hack
you.
for wrong, you can hack for good.
Yes, and still for money. There are so many
Absolutely.
bug bounty
Okay.
programs now. Yeah, like you can go to Google, Facebook, Apple, and lots of other smaller companies through a variety of means and actually say,
Mhm.
hey, I found a major security vulnerability. They validate it, and they will literally
Absolutely.
pay you tens of
Hmm.
thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars for depending on the severity and potentially if it's
Hmm.
already been exploited and they didn't know. That's obviously even more important because they're literally shutting or closing a hole then that people are going through, a metaphorical hole. So good for you. That's terrific. Um, a little bit more about this. What has ICT enabled for Nigerians? Like, how does it enable? Yeah, let's start there. What has it enabled for you and the people you've trained?
For me, it changed my life. I mean, I literally was heading for the bottom of a pyramid. I was going to, end up looking for a job and struggling like many other young Nigerians are doing. But I learned how to use computers. I learned how to send emails, and that literally created those opportunities for me. At different points in my career, I've sent one email that would literally open doors of opportunities. In fact, my first job at Junior Achievement, when I got the letter saying after a series of interviews we had with you, I was confused because I didn't do any interviews. It was only exchange of emails between myself and the executive director at the time. And as far as she was concerned, she loved what she read and she wanted me to come work with them. So that was when I finished writing my exams in school. I didn't join the unemployment queue. I went straight to work in Lagos when I left my school in Ife. And for those that we have trained, let me describe the dramatic change that we've seen in many of them with the story of Famous. Famous joined us in 2007 as part of the first cohort. Famous, of course, grew up in Ajegunle. As far as it was concerned, it was also like myself, heading for the bottom of the pyramid. Came to our program, learned how to use computers, but focused a lot on Excel. I had no idea why, but later we found out that Famous had been told that spreadsheets were a big deal, so he focused on Microsoft Excel. He learned it. When there was an internship opportunity, he applied for it. He got the internship at the UK Deputy High Commission in Lagos. While he was there was an opportunity for a full-time job in the UK High Commission in Abuja. He applied for it, even though I was a bit skeptical. Like, you're not a graduate, you haven't gone to university or any tertiary institution, but then he got a job. For some reason, he got a job. They were looking for a database expert. He got the job, which was great. By the way, the biggest deal for him was not even getting the job at the time. It was that they sent a car to his house, a diplomatic car to his house to pick him up from the slum, take him to the airport, put him on an airplane, and then he flew to Abuja and back. It was the what he said to me was that was the biggest deal for him. But he got the job, and 4 months later, after receiving what he thought was a lot of money, he resigned. And then went to school, studied, medical biochemistry. As I speak to you today, Famous, who in 2007, just 14 years ago, was a kid who was headed for the bottom of the pyramid, is now an assistant manager at one of the top four global, management services firms, like KPMG. And that for me is great news. Same thing for Esther, shy girl who came there and said, "Oh, I want to learn how to use computers." And today, not only has Esther been part of some of the best, tech programs in Silicon Valley, but she herself started a company, Trilio, with some other girls. I guess they either were bought out or something, and then she's moved on to now work as a senior engineer. And that, of course, not every child that we trained ended up that way, but that tells me that this is what is possible because that's what I saw in my own life. So this I think is the big potential that technology has in changing lives. And don't forget, when you change one life, you change the entire life of family members, and those around them. And that for me is a big deal.
That's awesome. Those are some great stories that help illustrate that impact that Paradigm Initiative has and can continue to have. Um, I think maybe one more question about Paradigm, and we might move on to some other things. What's on the horizon for Paradigm Initiative right now? Like, and what's
Oh yeah.
yeah, what's coming next?
You can see me smiling. I'm smiling because for many years we struggled with the fact that there was, I mean, two key things. One is the fact that that program was started in a cyber cafe in Ajigula in Lagos, Nigeria in 2007, has now been exported into many states across Nigeria and also Senegal. So sometime later this year, I'm going to be in Senegal with many of our team members to launch our program kicking off in Senegal. That I'm excited about because that gives us the opportunity. We've tested it. Now we're exporting it to as many countries as possible. But the second, and even maybe a bit more exciting because it has started for me, is that for so many years we had a challenge with helping people whose rights were violated to seek redress and get justice. Um, a few days ago, we launched a platform called Reporti, RIPOTI. And if you go to reporti.africa, you will see now that anyone in any country on the African continent can now report digital rights violations. And when they report, the beautiful thing is what happens on the back end. When you report, ourselves, Paradigm Initiative, and about 12 other partners, we get that report. It's escalated to the right person. If it's a privacy problem, in Namibia, we then forward that to a partner in Namibia or in Southern Africa who knows Namibia to work on that case. And you can track the progress of that case reported, assigned, confirmed, assigned, case in court, update, justice served. You know, it's beautiful for me because I think not only will people seek justice, but now we can have data evidence that we can take to different governments and say, for example, in 2025, Namibia is the one that had the least number of, of reports, and Zimbabwe is the one that had a middle level, and Nigeria had a worst level of reports. You need to do something about it. It's not because it's emotional right now; it's because the numbers back it up, and that's something exciting that we just started, and I look forward to how it's going to pan out.
That's awesome. I'm this British individual. I remember he made something similar, but it was it was to deal with parking tickets. This seems like basically like file a an appeal against a parking ticket you got in your
Mm,
city, and then it would basically automate that and run it up the chain as high as it needed to go, and potentially it would get
mm,
absolved because people just didn't want to deal with it. This seems like that level of automation, but at a whole other importance level, because obviously you're looking at human rights
absolutely.
complaints and trying to make some momentum forward and keep track of all that. So that's an incredible way to think about this sort of technology and apply it in a way that hopefully does a lot of good. So that's
Yeah.
terrific. Um, everywhere you go, uh, different platforms succeed at different levels. Here in North America, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest are certainly some of the most popular. LinkedIn is obviously really popular. If you go to Asia, you get completely different brands like Sino Weibo, Kakao Talk, Line, etc., depending on the country. I'm curious about what are the most popular social media platforms in Africa?
A few years ago, I would say Facebook. But right now, it just appears that that Africa is a WhatsApp
Hmm.
continent. Incidentally, they are owned by the same company. Uh, so in a way, Facebook is the most popular. There is a lot of Twittering, but not as much as Facebook. There's a lot of Instagramming. There's a lot of TikTok, but those are with the more trendy and younger people. But when you look at across the entire spectrum of various ages, I think that what would be most popular would be Facebook.
Okay, all right. For the WhatsApp, is that a lot of one-on-one, or is that more people creating groups because of the end-to-end encryption and talking that way? Do you know?
It's all of that, but it's more of I got this. I'm forwarding it. I've seen more forwarded many times in the last few days than I've seen, maybe in the past year. It's just we're chatty people. You will hear that the African tradition is very oral. You probably won't have too many people writing. I mean, of course, that's changed. I mean, we're much more educated than before. We're writing more and things like that. But that oral tradition, that nighttime fireside storytelling,
Hmm.
still makes you a bit more prone to chatting on the phone, or just sharing information, sharing videos, sharing voice messages, and these are all the things that WhatsApp does very, very well.
That's cool. How has how has social media platforms like that transformed your life? It sounds like are a lot of
Mhm.
those oral traditions just being turned into videos and shared around, or has it helped spark any sort of important change?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I actually just did so the Windward Declaration about journalism and freedom of the press, which was done in 1991. The 30th anniversary was just being celebrated, and I did a short take on what I see as the role of social media in Africa, especially in governance. So from about 2008, when internet access improved and social media was beginning to play a major role, you could see a lot of people having conversations and being able to hear, their opinion a bit more. Um,
Hmm.
and you've seen things, like protests in Nigeria, in Cote d'Ivoire, in Senegal, in even Mali, that were inspired by conversations that happened on social media and then went to the streets. And a lot of, and that of course explains why there have been a lot of internet shutdowns by many governments, because they're like, who are these young people talking? Why do they have so much following and things like that? And maybe somebody told them, oh, by the way, it's called the internet, and they're like, you know what, just shut it down. So the internet, social media has played a major role. Um, in helping people to find so exit and voice and loyalty are three concepts that people always want to experience. A lot of people find exit in just assuming that I'm going to create an island of sanity for myself in the midst of all of this trouble. But in terms of voice, I think that nothing has given Africans as much voice as social media. And the reason for that is almost because, I mean, is supported by the fact that, unfortunately, mainstream media, television, radio, and others are affected a lot by government influence. Some of them are even owned by government. Some of them can be influenced by governments. But thankfully, social media is a bit more decentralized. Of course, it's still owned by someone. There are still interests in Facebook or Twitter. There are investors. There are governments who sort of have their way around through laws and things like that, but it provides a better platform for conversation. So for me, I got very active on Twitter because it was a place I found my voice, a place where I could, express myself, share opportunities, talk about what I was doing, and all that.
You mentioned the internet being shut down at various times. I've certainly read about that. Have has social media being as the catalyst to that's led to some of these protests and things like that, has that led to any rules being applied either in Nigeria or elsewhere in Africa to what you can say online, or access to a specific platform or anything like that?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we publish what is called Londa. Used to be known as Digital Rights in Africa Report, and then eventually Digital Rights and Action in Africa Report every year, Paradigm Initiative, and it chronicles the stories. I mean, for this year, we did for 2020, which was published just last month. We did a report on 20 countries, and you can find in 16 of the 20 countries, at least 16 of the 20 countries, scenarios where governments have either restricted access, punished journalists or popular citizens because of the things that they say on social media. In fact, in many cases, including in the case of Uganda, which is now popular, one of the major reasons why Bobby Wine, who ran for president
Hmm.
against the dictator Museveni,
Yeah.
one of the reasons why he's been prosecuted is because he has a strong following on social media. If he was just a regular opposition guy who was making noise, they would have made him disappear very easily. But the fact that he's got a strong following, is sharing information, and this is the power of digital, of social media, is the fact that you're not just a consumer, you're a prosumer, you're a producer and a consumer. You can be the actor, recording yourself, sharing information. You are in the news, you are the news, you make the news, you report the news, and that is the beauty of it. So we've seen many countries where there have been many cybercrime laws that target people because of social media. In fact, in Nigeria, Cameroon, Ethiopia, last year we had to run campaigns because those countries were using fake news, aka fake news, which is basically disinformation, and dangerous speech, aka it's speech. They were using those as excuses to create new legislation that would target people who were using social media actively.
Yeah, that's actually exactly what I was going to ask about the kind of the inverse, where you hope, regular people or people running for office, certainly if they're not in a position of power right now, they are often speaking truth to power. They are bringing what they see as the voice of the people, their friends and neighbors and family, to that level. On the flip side, we see really often all over the place that the people in power will do exactly this. They'll create some sort of false narrative. They will create falsify charges, criminal charges against a dissident or somebody who's
Yeah.
challenging the
Hmm.
status quo. Uh, do you see that going away anytime soon, or does it feel like it's getting worse right now?
No, it's not going to go away anytime soon. It's going to get worse. And the reason I say that is Africa has less than 40% of internet users at the moment. So the more internet access that we have on the continent, the more voices you're going to have, and the more pressure governments will feel, and the more they will react. Many of them are even late to the game. Many of them are now buying surveillance equipment, uh, using excuses of national security, but primary reason they're getting that kind of equipment is to find a problem before it occurs. This guy is troublesome, track him. This lady is troublesome, track her. Before they post damaging information, arrest them. And so it's not going to go away anytime soon. But what I think will be the balance of forces will be when citizen power increases, when there's a lot more voice. Yes, as government pushes back, there will be platforms like Reporty and others that would assure people that you can get justice if your rights are violated. Because the problem right now is nobody wants to be the guinea pig. I don't want to be the one to be arrested by the Secret Service in Nigeria, because the story is if you're picked up by the Secret Service in Nigeria, you disappear. I mean, I've had brushes with them at least twice, and thankfully I didn't disappear. I mean, in my own case, I think the second time especially, I think I was lucky because I posted a tweet. It became popular. Diplomatic institutions, lawyers, and everybody started calling them, and so they had no choice but to release me. But there are a few people who will be bold enough to say, you know what, whatever it takes, I'm going to do it, because people say things like, if you die for yourself, nothing will change. I think that over time, people realize that even if it costs you, anything that everyone is scared, of, even at that, there are micro changes beginning to happen. Many years ago, I probably wouldn't have had the confidence to confront a presidential candidate and say to him that if you disappoint us, you'll be voted out, without being arrested or beaten up or something like that. But I mean, I did that, 6 years ago when the current president was running for office, and I had no fear because I knew that there's a certain level that you get to that that things are so bad that people need to begin to act. It's like the story we tell around here that when you chase a goat, the goat will run from you. But there's a point where you chase the goat it gets to a wall, and it can't break to go into the wall. So it turns around and it bites you because it doesn't have a choice. I think that there's a point where African governments will push citizens to the wall, and then they will turn around and bite them. At that point, we'll begin to see a change.
Yeah, and I I have to think, being very ruthless about the political side of this, they have to imagine at some point that somebody like you, potentially, who does have a voice and is fairly well known, um, uh, they could potentially turn you into a martyr, which of course then has the
Hmm.
opposite effect of what they were trying to do in the first place.
Absolutely. I mean, because to be honest, there were things that I didn't plan to do before government thought to send the security services after me that I eventually did. They gave me a platform. They gave me a voice. At some point, in fact, after my last brush with the security services, I printed a red T-shirt that had a hashtag, "Bring back our girls" on it. And unfortunately for the president, what happened was that I actually attended the same meeting with him, the World Economic Forum, and I was being given an award. I got my Schwab, honor in the same place, and himself, the president at the time, and the president of Rwanda had to stand with me and other winners in the picture. And there I was. I mean, what kind of activism? They led me to that level of activism, wearing a T-shirt that says "Bring back our girls," which is exactly what the president didn't want talked about, with him in the background. Of course, the official photos never made their way out because, I mean, it was going to be embarrassing for them. But mission accomplished for me. And I remember there was a joke, a friend of mine saying, "Oh my God, I think they're going to shoot you from, there's a sniper somewhere who is going to shoot you. Don't wear that t shirt." And I'm like, "Are you kidding? The president is right behind me. How on earth do they know that I'm not going to dodge? They're not going to kill the president. Of course not."
Yeah, yeah. I'd be dodging, but that's for sure. If I hear something, I'm getting down. That was Bring Back Our Girls. That was the Boko Haram.
Yes,
Not that it wasn't an
kidnapping the
issue
girls.
before
Yeah.
that, but all of a sudden, I think they had kidnapped around like 400 women or young girls, and
300
then
women. Yep.
things, yeah, and then things just blew up everywhere. I remember hearing about that. I'm
Yeah.
sure pretty much everybody who's of a certain age remembers hearing about that late last decade, I
Mhm.
guess. And I know that that's still not 100% resolved. So
It's not.
yeah, no, that certainly would have looked really bad for the president to either have you arrested as soon as you got home or assassinated or anything like that. Um,
Yeah.
Certainly no coincidences there if that had occurred. So you're dealing with a variety of issues. Obviously, you have found a way to empower at least some Nigerian individuals and other Senegalese and other places with digital skills pointed in the right direction, in a positive, productive
Mm.
direction. On the flip side, government gets angry that you do various things. They shut down the internet. What kind of effect has that had on the economy and on the people you help and others?
So, like I mentioned earlier, the story of Famous and Esther, for most of them, what happens is the moment they're able to get their first job, it means they've started a journey towards being employed for a long time. What we've seen is many of them then resign and go back to school, or they try to go to school because with a university degree, you have a better chance, which is great. And so what we're seeing is for the individuals and their immediate families. We do this publication called Echoes from Life because it's called the Life Program, Echoes from Life that we publish, every other year. And every time I read the stories of these young people, I mean, I know them because I get to meet them. Fortunately, there are not too many of them just yet. I still travel to all of the locations to meet all of the students. And when I read their stories, I'm close to tears because I can see my story in theirs. I can see that these are people who, otherwise would have ended up without jobs and would have been frustrated. Maybe some going into crime, maybe some just getting frustrated. But because they were given digital skills, are able to start earning income either online through some outsourced work, or all of those platforms that make available sort of kind of types of work, or they're then able to build on those digital skills to get their first internship or their first job. So what we've seen is that for majority of them, and I don't like this, but it's a reality, is that after a while they leave their communities. They get too comfortable for those communities. I mean, of course, they're able to share resources with their parents who are still there and things like that. What I would love if is for anyone who then gets to that level not to have to travel to urban areas, because that is where the real opportunities are. But that speaks to you about the level of the urban rural gaps. So at some point, if they stayed in the rural areas where they lived in or in the urban slum, they wouldn't have any opportunities. So one of the things that we're hoping for is that at some point, especially with things like broadband access and things like that, which means you can work from anywhere. At least 2020 taught us a lot about remote work. Is that
Yes, it
these
did.
young people will not have to leave their locations, but can work from where they are, so that they don't also lose those social ties that they have to their location. So we've seen at the personal level a lot of economic growth. We've seen at a what we would love to see next is to scale that to a level where we're able to either work with policymakers or we have it replicated by other institutions, such that that economic opportunity is then multiplied. Into communities, into states, and of course, into countries and regions.
As opposed to anytime the government, whoever happens to be in power at the time, seeing something they don't like online,
Mhm.
thinking to themselves, "Oh, if I just turn it off for a little while, there's no big
Yeah.
deal." There is a big. It is a big
Yeah.
deal, right?
It is. It is. It is. I
Yeah.
mean, so
So
what I
same
say
here.
is
Like,
that Africa, yeah, yeah,
go
Africa
ahead. Go
spends
ahead.
too much time worrying about creating a climate of fear online. Oh my God, these guys are too scary. They say too many nasty things about me. I am the president. Just shut them up. We have no business worrying too much about that. All of the money we're spending in surveillance on surveillance equipment, which is not being used for security, by the way. If it was being used for security or to counter terrorism, that would be cool. But it's being used to identify and, in quotes, neutralize opposition figures. We should move away from that and invest resources in a climate of innovation so that a lot of young people do not see the internet as a place where they are scared of what government would do, but as a place where they can build tools that can be sold globally. And we have seen so many of that happen. A lot of people were following the news about, Lagos, Nairobi, Johannesburg, Accra will know the stories of tons of investment from Silicon Valley and from other places that have come into those cities for tech startups. That is in spite of government inaction. Imagine that policy and government action supported them.
Yeah, I mean that was one of the big original promises of the internet is maybe not necessarily free, but just access to resources in some way that otherwise would be incredibly difficult to access or impossible to access because you weren't at the socio-economical level that will allow you to access it, or it's just not available in your jurisdiction, whether it's a state or a
Mm,
city or a country. So the fact that you were able to, at a fairly young age, get access to a computer, more or less teach yourself at least enough to find that you were really interested in the technology and keep moving forward with your education. And now you've turned that into educating others and potentially helping generate millions of dollars of investment into Lego specifically, if not Nigeria in general. That's one person, and if one person can have that sort of impact, money
mm,
flowing in, which I've certainly read about in the past from places that already have it and are willing to invest in a completely different economy with a completely different group of people that they don't know, but are willing, obviously, to put time and money into to invest in. That's obviously the investor's looking for a return, so that's a win for them if everything works out, and it's a win
absolutely.
for the people who are on the receiving end of getting additional job opportunities, learning more, gaining management and leadership skills, and hopefully you turn into the Legos equivalent of the PayPal mafia, where you build a thing, you sell it, you make a ton of money, and you start reinvesting that
Mm,
into additional startups that you're creating or other people, because then you make your money make more money. There's no reason why that can't
mm,
happen across the entire African continent. If there's a willingness there to allow foreign capital to come in, allow people to learn and to make mistakes, learn from them, keep growing, and keep educating themselves, and eventually turn that into something really productive. Obviously, at the end. And anytime you shut down the internet, you're doing the opposite. So that's
absolutely.
yeah. We only have a couple minutes left here, so I want to take just a couple more questions. You talked a little bit about this earlier, but in a time when people are so publicly opinionated and and feeling more like they should be speaking up and are speaking up,
Mm.
and as a result, like you, potentially getting stopped by the police, how do we protect individuals while also not stifling
Mm.
their freedom of expression?
That is a debate and a process that should continue and will have to continue for a very long time. And I know that the example of the Facebook Oversight Board that announced their decision on Donald Trump as ban, the report coming out yesterday was also very useful. And the reason I say this is because, you know, um, you can never have a state of 50-50, depending on the context. I'll give you an example. In a place where a bomb has just gone off, if you ask people to choose between, this is false dichotomy by the way, but if you ask them to choose between security and their rights, most of them will say they want security. At that point,
Yeah,
the adrenaline is running. They're not really thinking about rights. And unfortunately, that is what happens in many security circles. They're so focused on security that they don't even care about rights. Now, what I think we need is to balance that with a lot more demand and conversation about rights so that, yes, people will say let's protect people so that they don't get hurt. Everybody agrees on child pornography being a wrong thing, right? There are those things we all agree on that, listen, we don't go there. But for the areas where we don't agree, at least we should know this for a fact that there should be a process that everyone will be subjected to so that you don't
right.
arbitrarily turn it off for one person and leave one other person on. And I think that's where we need to find a balance to create community standards that we all, and I'm not referring specifically to platforms standards, I'm referring to community norms, a general
Yeah,
agreement that if someone becomes violent and begins to threaten and says, oh, I know your address, I know where you live, I'm going to come to kill you, they have a right, I mean, the platform has a right to suspend them, right? So that they do not bring harm to others. Because the way we say it is that your rights end where someone else's rights begin. I would want to say
right.
that rights flow into each other. And the whole concept of rights, by the way, is about dignity, is about respecting, getting respect for your dignity, which I think you should extend to others. So I think if the original, understanding is that this is about human dignity and respect for others, then it becomes easier for all of us to identify when some community members are going wrong and they need to be corrected. But when that will happen, it must be lawful or legal, it must be proportionate. Someone can't say, is the president sick? And then you throw him to jail. No. It must be legal, it must be proportionate, and it must be necessary. And beyond all that, it must conform to standards. We cannot haphazardly say this journalist, said this, send him to 7 years in jail. This person, there must be standards. And I think that is where we may be able to find a balance to say that there are certain norms we all subscribe to, but if there is a need to sanction anyone, it must be based on certain, criteria that have been set. That must be lawful, proportionate, necessary, and at the same time, it must be the same principle applying to everyone and no favoritism.
Yeah, yeah. I think for anybody who by now, by the time you listen to this, hasn't read it, I think some of the really important things that came out of that Facebook Oversight Board decision were that the indefinite ban is, in their opinion, not okay, and Facebook needs to revisit that and add some sort of time limit to it. So that was interesting,
Mm.
and the fact that Facebook has to have already policies in place for whatever they see as a violation, as opposed
Yes.
to what it sounds like happened was they came up with rules on the fly, ad hoc,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
then applied them. And
Yeah.
in a crisis, that potentially could happen and might be acceptable. But certainly that was a situation where this was going on and on and on, right? And just kind of
Yeah. It wasn't
escalating.
time bound.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
No, it certainly wasn't time bound, and it wasn't a sudden outburst of some kind that Facebook just kind of had to deal with in the moment, right? So yeah, so even in that case, you could see a fairly fair balance of, yes, Facebook, it's your platform, you can ban this person, but it needs to be time bound, it needs to be based on policies that
Yeah.
already exist, etc., kind of getting back to where you're going, but obviously at a larger level for an entire nation
Yeah.
or an entire continent or the world. Cool. Last question. Uh, if you don't mind me asking, how do you protect your privacy online? What sort of tools do you use and that kind of thing?
Okay. So default for me is to, first of all, if I'm going to be on a platform, to go to the settings. Because ideally the default should be safe, but the default is never safe, right? Your
Rarely,
location is
very
turned on
rarely.
automatically. Rarely do you have a platform that, because I mean, to be honest, you are the product, right? They have to use you, your data, as advert, opportunities to get revenue.
Hmm.
So they need to make it easier for themselves to get money. So the first thing I say to people is, please check the settings, which is what I do, and I make sure that whatever I'm not sure of, I don't allow. So I revoke access to any app that I don't know about. No matter how nice the icon looks, I revoke access to it. And I make sure that I am more opt in than opt out.
Yeah.
If I want it, I bring it on. The second is I make sure, I mean, as much as possible, I use a very complex password. And I think I cracked the password, thing by making sure I never use passwords in one language. I do a mix of languages or my local language. It is going to be difficult for anyone to crack a password in my local language who is a hacker from either the UK or the US or Russia or China. It's
Russia,
going to be
China,
difficult for
yeah.
them to crack in my local. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be difficult to crack in my local language. And as much as possible, two-factor authentication. But we've not learned, as we all know, it's not foolproof. Anyone can get access to your SIM card or your phone and all that. But what I make sure to do is that from time to time, I don't leave any platform unused for a long time. So that because if you leave it unused for a long time, then anything can happen, and you won't know. So I make sure I
Sure.
change the settings. I make sure that I use a complex password. I make sure that two-factor authentication is turned on. And by the way, that's what led to the project that I spent the better part of last year working on as a Stanford Digital Civil Society Fellow. It's called IETA, IETA.Africa. It's a digital rights toolkit for people who work in civil society and need to protect themselves. All of the experiences I've had in terms of what kind of letters to write if you get into trouble, what kind of statements to release through the media, have all been compiled into that toolkit. But this is basically what I make sure that I do to stay safe online. And my watchword is be paranoid. If someone says be my friend, I don't trust that the picture I'm looking at
Yeah.
is of Derek. No. I Google you, I check LinkedIn, I check Facebook, I look for an email address, I look for a number, I make sure that this person is really who they are. And if for any reason I have to accept to be connected to you, I would never. I mean, just yesterday, someone asked one of my children's trainers for his piano lessons, asked to share the video of a session between himself and my son online, to share it with a potential customer, so they can market, online piano lessons. And I was like, tell him to call me. I'll tell him if it's good or not. But once the video of my son in my home leaves the safe place where I've stored it, you don't know what's going to happen to it. And it was really great because that was also an opportunity for him to learn about digital hygiene.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I'm I have children. I don't share pictures of them on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc. That is a decision they will make when they're old enough to understand the
Mm,
potential consequences. And then even then, if it's my Facebook account, I at some point I want to say to them, is it okay if I post this? Your choice,
yeah,
your face,
yeah,
and you
yeah,
should have a say. So that's a great place to end it on a here's how to protect yourself note, and something people don't always think about sharing, especially things about children online. Gbenga, thanks so much for your time today. This was a really, really interesting conversation, and I hope everybody else enjoys it. Thanks for listening to Private Podcast, and until we see you next time, stay free.
Thank you for having me, Derek.